Hey everyone and welcome back. For today's video I thought of talking about the Popper Showcase challenge that was held yesterday. So basically a showcase challenge is different from a normal format challenge. You can't enroll in it with qualifier point or event tickets, but only with qualifier point. Yeah, I can't qualify. I can't pay play point. But you can only use qualifier point, and qualifier point are points that you usually get only by getting good results on Magic Online events or leagues. So this kind of event usually can be an event with more players and hypothetically even better players. Yesterday's event, for the yesterday event, I decided to play Affinity because I was expecting a metagame filled with Mono Red Blitz and Rakdos Madness. Also, I was expecting Freeze as most played anti-red aggressive strategies, and that was exactly the metagame. Well, not exactly right, because Affinity was still the most played deck, and I wasn't expecting Affinity to be played so much, for the simple reason that Affinity right now seems to not be so present on the metagame. Hypothetically speaking, Mono Blitz and Rakdos Madness are well positioned against Affinity, but most times Affinity is not able to interact well with those decks, only because most player lists don't really have enough aid against those decks. So let's take a look at the list I've played yesterday. It's a classic Grixis Affinity list, but I'm not playing Frogmite, and I'm playing Meteoric Buke instead of Counterspell, so we can call it Counter Affinity, because there are 4 copies of a Counterspell in the main deck, and I decided to play certain cards in more copies than usual, in example Blood Fountain and Two-Cast, that usually are played at most in 3 copies, for the simple reason that I think that Two-Cast is just too much good, and I also had added more blue lands and Blood Fountain because I was playing 4 copies of Metallic Rebuke. And Metallic Rebuke with Blood Fountain to me seems too much good as an interaction to not play 4 copies of a card that I already think that is just too good. Because you can play Meteoric Rebuke on turn 2 if you have a Blood Fountain in a very easy way. So, for example, you can play a tapped land on turn 1 and then an untapped land on turn 2 and play Meteoric Rebuke and leave one blue mana open to cast Meteoric Rebuke by tapping to the Blood Token and the Blood Fountain, and of course the blue mana source. So in my opinion, Affinity is still the best mid-range strategy. Right now Affinity is no longer an aggro deck, and Frogmite doesn't really give an aggro vibe to Mirror Enforcer, for the simple reason that only Frogmite doesn't give enough aggro or beatdown to the deck by itself. It's not a 4/4 for 0 or 2 mana if you hypothetically want to play Carefully Exposure or something similar. Frogmite is the weaker card you can play on in Affinity, and usually Frogmite is good only if you want to sacrifice it with Draconos Bargain or if you have a Mirror Enforcer. Most times when Affinity plays Frogmite and I'm against Affinity, Frogmite is an issue only if they have another Frogmite or only if they have another Mirror Enforcer. So for that reason I think that we can easily cut Frogmite. Also in this metagame, Affinity works way better as a control-ish style deck, so for that reason I think that it's better to play more interactive spells in form, an example of Meteoric Rebuke, and then also adjust the sideboard to be able to beat the troublesome matchups. In this case, of course, Mono Red Blitz and Rakdos Burn were the decks that I wanted to face and defeat the most. For that reason, I was playing 4 copies of Blue Elemental Blast, and also I cut all the copies of Generous Edict to play 3 copies of Devour Flesh. I also thought of playing Wither the Storm instead of the third copy of Devour Flesh, because you can generate green mana from Deadly Dispute and Chromatic Star, but having only 8 cards able to add green to cast Wither the Storm against aggressive decks doesn't seem really reliable. So for that reason I prefer the third copy of Devour Flesh, which often can also be a removal spell instead of a life gain spell. For that reason, I think that if you play 4 copies of Blue Elemental Blast and 3 copies of Devour Flesh, you cover plenty of Mono Red Blitz and Rakdos Burn. Affinity is no longer a deck that plays the beatdown role, and generally speaking about the sideboard, the other part of the sideboard is just meant to interact well with decks that tries to beat Affinity by playing a more aggressive role. For example, Pyroblast, I think that having only 2 copies of Pyroblast is not enough, since I'm also not running Cast Down, and I'm also running only 1 copy of Makeshift Munition in my main deck, and Pyroblast is meant mainly to have another removal spells to kill Furies or ninjas or counter Ogre Bolas. And of course, I also wanted the second copy of Makeshift Munitions, because I think that Makeshift Munitions is the best card you can play against Furies. It can be both a removal spell and also a proper finisher. So against Furies, I can burn out cards like Blood Fountain or Gurmagangler if I want to play lesser amount of creatures. And also against Fairies, I often cut Mirror Retriever and other recursion creatures, so I mostly rely on resolving a Blood Fountain in the early game and then return back 1 or more times a couple of Mirror Enforcer to kill them. They're also not playing any mobs within Sandstorm, so Blood Fountain and Mirror Enforcer are just great against Fairies. And then we have Arms of Adar, which is replacing Caracal Shaman. Caracal Shaman nowadays is bad. It used to be awesome to kill Stumpy, Wolves and Elves, but right now those 3 decks aren't played anymore, at least on Magical Line. Maybe on Real they are still present, but on Magical Line it's been a while since I visited them, and Arms of Adar is the right answer, is the right card to answer Burst Bully and sometimes Fairies. The most important part about Arms of Adar, or maybe the only important part about Arms of Adar, at least for us which are playing Affinity, is that they can counter it with Prismatic Strands, Lumitrid Field, or Hydroblast. So for that reason, Arms of Adar is better compared to Field Cannonade. Also, it's better compared to Suffocating Fumes and Electricary, because they can't counter it with Lumitrid Field or Parapet or any other effect that gives a +1 on the creature tokenize, and it's just great. You can also bring in against Boros Metalcraft, which is a thorough matchup, but sometimes they win against you because they have a very fast start with Secret of the Week, Link to Cool the Turbo, etc, etc, etc. I think we should point that I was playing 61 cards instead of 16. Doesn't change anything much, but playing 1 more card usually, and I only thought about having 2 cards in my starting end, and if you add an extra card, you just lose 1% point on having the change to have an offlines in your hand. I think that can sometimes be good to have more cards in your deck if you don't want to flood it too much, because I haven't changed the amount of lands. But generally speaking, playing only 60 cards is usually better. A spicy card I was playing instead of the second copy of Gourmet Angler was Ardent Elementalist, because I really like Ardent Elementalist. I like card vintage card and recruitment card, and Ardent Elementalist to me seems just great because you can return it with Blood Fountain to bring back a Power Blast, Rebuke, Running Blast, or Draw Spell. In example against Burn, I thought that bringing back Reckoner's Bane with Ardent Elementalist would be so great. Imagine, for example, you have 2 copies of Reckoner's Bane to your graveyard, you play Ardent Elementalist, you bring back Reckoner's Bane, you sacrifice Elementalist with Reckoner's Bane, and so you always have 1 copy of Reckoner's Bane, and then getting back 4 lives each time and drawing 2 cards. Okay, it costs 6 mana, and you also need to crack a Blood Fountain, but I think that could be truly good, or at least cool. Well, generally speaking about the event, I think we can note that 2 copies of Trooper Fog get into top 8. Well, I truly suggest you to not play Trooper Fog. I'm a huge fan of the deck, but it's pretty unpleasant to play against Trooper Fog, and also I guess that most of you people that watch this, that is watching this video, aren't playing on Magic Online, and Trooper Fog is, from my point of view, playable only on Magic Online, because it's really weak against Fairies. You lose something like 9 match out of 10 against Fairies. And also, if you on paper, if you lose the first game, then you aren't able to win the second or the third game, because the deck is just really slow. It's probably the deck requiring more time to win in the whole format, since isn't really relying on having a proper win condition, because the win condition is Stream of Doubt and hoping just to have enough time to mill out your opponent with Stream of Doubt in at least 2 matches out of 3 means that you are planning to play something like 60 rounds, because this deck can't win before turn 20. And as you can think, being able to play 20 match for 3 games consecutively doesn't seem really I think I will be not able, even if I play really fast. You can just face a really slow player, or a player that haven't played never the format, so you need to explain to it whatever you are doing, or it just takes time thinking of what they need to do, because Trooper Fog is relying on having a critical amount of card advantage, so and also lands, so they may take their time thinking about which card they need to counter you, an example, or taking time fetching the deck, discarding cards, just to say so. Another thing that I think is important to note is that Affinity, even though it wasn't really played a lot in the last month, still was the most played deck of the tournament, and still got a 17% of win rate over the metagame. No, sorry, it got a 56% win rate against no mirror match, and a 55% against all the match faced. 16% was the percent of the deck on the whole metagame. It wasn't the most winning deck, but being able to be both the most played deck and one of the most winning deck means that the deck is still great. and if I remember correctly, having a lot of Rakdos Madness and Mono Red Blitz really favor a lot Fairies and Boros over other controlish strategies, in example Azurius Familiar and GSK Ephemerate, which are the only blue control decks that are currently playable in the metagame. Yeah, you can play something like Mono Black Control without Green Merchant of Asphodel and other creatures, and you can also play an example is Cure with Serpentine Cure and playing as a win condition, which is a controlled combo deck. And you can also play Dimir Control, so basically Dimir Delver without Delver of Secrets and with more card advantage. But I guess that Ephemeral is still the best control strategy, especially if the metagame evolves only around the two main strategies, hyper aggro decks and hyper value decks. So for that reason, Ephemerate doesn't seem really well positioned because it could be weak both against Mono Red Blitz and of course against Affinity or Fairies. Well guys, thank you for watching this video. I'm planning to publish at least one league in English for the next week. I'm not sure which deck I'll choose eventually because I'm planning to record a league with Mono Red Blitz and a league with Hordes of Tortured Existence with Basilisk Gate. So maybe I'll publish first Tortured, or maybe I'll publish first Blitz. We will see.